Well, hey there, and welcome back to Heimler's History. Now, we've been going through Unit 5 of the AP U.S. History curriculum, and in this video, we need to continue talking about the growing tension caused by slavery from 1844 until the Civil War, and various proposals attempted to solve the problem, including the most well-known of these proposals, the Compromise of 1850. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. So in the last video, we talked about the Mexican-American War and how all the lands won by the United States in that war caused a lot of tension with respect to the expansion of slavery. In fact, that fight began before the war was even won, when the Wilmot Proviso was narrowly defeated in Congress, which would have prohibited slavery in any territory won in the war. So with that proposal struck down, we need to have a look at the major positions held by those in power with respect to the expansion of slavery into the territories. Now, first, there was the Southern position, and not surprisingly, this group of people argued that slavery was a constitutional right. Additionally, they argued that the question about where slavery could and could not exist had already been decided in the Missouri Compromise, otherwise known as the Compromise of 1820. Since the line had already been established where slavery could exist and could not exist, the Southerners just said, why don't we draw the line right onto the Pacific Ocean? Let's just pause here for a second, because when we're talking about compromises and legislation, it can sound kind of dull, but I can't emphasize enough just how important the Missouri Compromise was to the slaveholding South. For them, it was a guarantee that slavery, not to mention their entire economy and way of life, would continue to exist unharassed below this line, and for them, they held on to the dictates of this compromise with nigh unto scriptural tenacity. Because at the end of the day, for Southerners, any attempt to curtail slavery was a move towards its entire destruction. The second position regarding the expansion of slavery was the free soil movement, and this movement was composed of Northern Democrats and Whigs, and when they said free soil, what they meant was that they wanted any new territories acquired to be the dominion of free laborers, not enslaved ones. But within the free soil movement, there was certainly conflicting views. It was true that Northern Democrats and Whigs wanted slavery banned in the new territories, but it wasn't necessarily because they thought slavery was a moral evil. In fact, they didn't even want black people, enslaved or free, to be granted access to settle in those new territories. Like, they envisioned these new territories to be a land of white opportunity without the need to compete with enslaved labor. But also within this faction were abolitionists who very much had different ideas about slavery. Like, abolitionists wanted to ban slavery everywhere, not only in the newly acquired territories, but also in the states where it had existed time immemorial. Now, some of these folks eventually went on to found a new political party, namely the Free Soil Party, on which more in another video. The third position with respect to the expansion of slavery was popular sovereignty, and to understand what these folks proposed, you just have to look at the two words. Popular means people, and sovereignty means power. So those who held the popular sovereignty position argued that the people living in each territory should decide the slavery question for themselves. And hey, doesn't that sound like a reasonable middle ground position? Like, shouldn't this be the position that all the rival factions took? Well, no, and it's not hard to understand why. Popular sovereignty would have been great for those in the southern position if the territory in question chose to allow slavery. But what if they didn't? Remember, to them, any curtailment of slavery was an attack on the whole system. Oh, and by the way, the Compromise of 1820, we already decided this question. Popular sovereignty would have been great for the free soilers too if the territories decided against slavery, but who's to say they would? So yeah, like, maybe on paper this was a plan that can settle some tension, but in reality it only increased it. Now, it's probably not hard to imagine that it was an exceedingly bitter fight between folks who held these three positions. Like, all of them were fundamentally incompatible with one another, and compromise between them proved impossible. And then the Mexican-American War came to a close, and all this new territory came into the Union, and the fight grew even more intense, particularly because California and New Mexico entered as free states, and that one fact caused Southerners to rise up and threaten secession from the Union. But wait, why are they so salty about two more states coming into the Union? Well, I've mentioned it all along the way if you've been with me in all these videos. One of the key establishments that kept northern and southern states together in the Union was a perfect balance in the Senate. Remember, the House of Representatives represents states by population, but each state in the Senate is equal, and we can see the importance of this balance in something like the Wilmot Proviso, which, again, proposed to ban slavery in the territories. It was passed by the House because the northern states were more populous and thus had more influence in the House. But it was struck down in the Senate precisely because of this balance between slave and free states, and in order for a bill to pass into a law, it requires a simple majority vote. But if the seats in the Senate are exactly equal and both halves vote exactly in line with their sectional beliefs, then the vote vote will always be 50-50, and thus no laws banning slavery could ever be passed. And that is why the admission of California and New Mexico as free states was such a contentious issue. It decisively tipped the balance in the Senate towards the free states. So now, no matter what those who held the southern position did, they could not get laws passed that favored them. And in fact, because free soilers were concentrated in the north, this could mean the end of slavery altogether. Okay, so I hope you can feel that tension and why it gave rise to calls for secession. So something needed to be done to mollify the southern states and prevent the breakup of the Union. And for that, here comes our boy Henry Clay riding in to save the day on his horse named Compromise. He didn't really have a horse named Compromise. It was just like a metaphor to illustrate how Henry Clay was, never mind, you get it. Anyway, in order to solve this most vexing of problems, Henry Clay proposed the Compromise of 1850, and here's what it did. First, the compromise said that the Mexican Cession would be further divided into the Utah and New Mexico territories, and that each would decide the slavery question by popular sovereignty. Second, California would be admitted as a free state. Third, the slave trade would be banned in the Washington, D.C. And fourth, a stricter fugitive slave law would be passed and enforced with vigor. Now, what this compromise did was to calm the tensions down just a little. Like the gaping neck wound that was the slavery question had a band-aid forcefully applied to it. However, it was that fugitive slave law that would end up breaking apart any calm that this compromise accomplished. And we'll talk more about this in the next video, but for now, it's enough to know what's obvious. If the North was in general against slavery, and more specifically here was the growing population of abolitionists, then enforcing a law that required them to arrest enslaved people who had escaped their plantations and then return them to the institution that they loathed, well, that was going to be, to put it mildly, difficult. All right, that's what you need to know about Unit 5, Topic 4 of the AP U.S. History curriculum. There are more videos for Unit 5 right over here, and if you need help getting an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May, then click right here and grab a review packet. If this video helped you and you want me to keep making them, then let me know by subscribing, and I shall oblige. Heimler out.